to just give a little sort of overview of the recent white paper that was published last week by Nicky Morgan called Educational Excellence Everywhere. And I'm just going to pick out bits of the paper to see how they relate to supplementary education. Educational excellence everywhere. Do we have a defined and settled role for education in tackling social inequality? This is a really tricky question because if we reframe education principally to be about self-enlightenment, empowerment and liberation from oppression, then it becomes a really incendiary issue. Now just imagine we actually educate our young people to be able to see the mechanisms of social oppression and to be able to call out the shadowy figures behind our so-called market freedoms. It's a hugely dangerous thought, really. So I'm not personally convinced that the type of autonomy mentioned in a recent white paper, Educational Excellence Everywhere, has this in mind when it talks about autonomy and greater parental control. So, as you can see, Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed has much to say about this revolutionary process of socially engaged education. He says that education either functions as an instrument which is used to facilitate integration of the younger generation into the logic of the present system and bring about conformity, or it becomes the practice of freedom, the means by which men and women deal critically and creatively with reality and discover how to participate in the transformation of their world. So I'm just going to let that sink in for a second or two. So let's think about the purpose of education, especially within a BME context, and let's see what the white paper might have to say. So why does our mainstream education system on so many levels seem to be failing our most deprived? Well, the burden of responsibility for this failure in popular discourse tends to fall most often on the deprived, where there's a notion of deprivation as a facet of culture that can be pathologized and problematized. It is, for example, fashionable in certain political circles to describe academic attainment as a cultural facet of certain groups and not of others, as though, this is really odd for me, as though culture itself can be praised or blamed for the outward effects of structural inequality. So, the recent white paper obliquely concedes this point when it recognises that, to quote, progress isn't felt everywhere. So let's quickly look at what can be done to make sure that progress can be felt from a BME perspective. Wei Li reminds us that complementary schools for immigrant and ethnic minority children in the UK have been an important socio-political educational movement in the country for nearly half a century. So the importance of education to the black community stems from the high academic aspirations of African Caribbean parents for their children to achieve high academic goals. An aspiration apparently endorsed by the white paper when it says on page 17 that through the provision of free schools and university technical colleges, it wants to, quote, enable parents and communities to demand more for their children. It's a good thing. However, as we'll hear from Esther later on, these higher aspirations are now increasingly felt in the area of enterprise, which is missing from the white paper, as it's not all just about academic achievements alone anymore. In fact, since the 1960s, the black community has tried to address their dissatisfaction with the mainstream schools by providing alternative education provision to help their children overcome the inequalities encountered within mainstream schools and wider society. So, within Manchester, there has been a long tradition of African Caribbean supplementary schools, such as the WIOCC, that was established in the 60s, and you'll meet them later. The Nella James Centre, which ran during the 1970s and the 1990s. STEPS, established since the 1980s, with Aquarius and Mrs D's, and not to forget GIFT and Highway Hope, established since the 2000s, whom you'll also meet shortly. My slide on there is just gone, but that's fine, we won't panic. So the focus of all of these schools primarily aims to provide culturally specific education. Now what does that mean? Maybe Black history and things that are heritage related alongside the core curriculum of English, maths and science. So the white paper seems to recognise the importance of cultural specificity when on page 90 it talks of the need to provide, quote, stretching and tailored curricula to meet the particular needs of their pupils or their local area or the particular ethos of the school. An example of this, Amber is going to be talking about, where she will explain how her school provides one-to-one mentoring for their learners. The other specific features of these schools often include smaller class sizes, teachers of similar socio-cultural background and greater parental involvement. Again, the paper's suggestion of an online parent portal that will provide parents with a one-stop shop, clearly and simply setting out the information they need to know about the school system and how to support their child. Now that's reminiscent of the face-to-face services already offered by many supplementary schools. So, during the past 3 years, the African Caribbean schools in Manchester have moved towards working within a consortium called Making Education Priority, where the main aim is to coordinate the work of the schools to improve quality and the sharing of good practice. This also involves developing strategic partnerships with statutory agencies, colleges and universities such as Manchester Metropolitan University and the University of Manchester. Just on this slide, as you can see, one of the hugely important things that we're working on is looking in critical and reflective thinking skills, but also looking at creative thinking as well. So one of the projects we ran was with the Manchester Museum Comes to You programme, which was about the museum bringing parts of their collection to the community so that the community could curate them and find out the stories behind each of the objects, and that stimulated discussions around some of the social historical issues. So for instance, we were looking at some beauty products from the Egyptian collection, and that got us talking about standards of beauty throughout the ages and the fact that men actually wore those eyeliner things in Egypt, but they were kind of sunblock apparently. So yeah, just to kind of stimulate debate and creative debate, and then we went to the museum to see the objects in the collections in full. Also, we visit the universities, so at MEaP, our schools also visit the science labs and sort of get hands-on experience. Amber will be talking more about that. Right. So, one of the ways in which MEaP's partnership has been developing with MEaP is through the development of its postgraduate certificate in teaching and learning. So as you can see there, it's broken down broadly into two areas: teaching, learning and assessment, but also school leadership and management. In an attempt to build teaching capacity within MEaP schools, we have developed a programme with the Faculty of Education that explores best practice in the area of teaching, learning and assessment, and especially school leadership and management. We feel that equipping our teachers with these skills and knowledge of best practice is important for us to deliver the best education we can to our young people. On page 28, the white paper talks about strengthening university and school-led teacher training, increasing the rigour of ITT, that's initial teacher training, content with greater focus on subject knowledge and evidence-based practice. Amber is also going to be talking about her teacher mentoring programme at WIOCC. So in terms of in-school training in the form of only having teacher placements that the paper says will replace QTS, Qualified Teacher Status, in 2020, we're not really sure about where the opportunities for deep-level reflective and creative and critical thinking will come from, notwithstanding the offer of CPD that the paper mentions. So, of course, we're going to have to talk very, very closely to our university partners to kind of see how this is going to work in practice. However, what we are sure about is the need for our teachers to be equipped with the highest levels of skills to deliver an education that includes the cultural contributions of its communities, whilst equipping them with the vital life skills to succeed in life. But in order to respond to the suggestions and aspirations in the white paper, we will undoubtedly need to reconsider our plans for adaptability and sustainability so that we can benefit from the proposed reforms. So I'm going to leave these huge questions of adaptability and sustainability hanging in the air as a backdrop to our discussions today as we talk about supplementary education.